Mount Mantap is a 2,200-meter peak in the northwest of the Korean peninsula, and since 2017, it has shifted by no less than 3.5 meters horizontally.
Most scientists believed it was impossible. A single bomb couldn't move a mountain until 2017, when North Korea proved them all wrong. Hidden beneath Mount Mantap, their nuclear test didn't just shake the ground, it destroyed it.
So combine the spatial and temporal resolution that we can make this kind of discovery to understand the rise, collapse, and compaction of the top of the mountain.
This is the untold story of the bomb that defied physics and the secrets North Korea never imagined we could reconstruct. The divided peninsula. Few modern conflicts have carved such a deep and lasting scar as the one that runs through the Korean peninsula. When World War II ended in 1945, the Korean people were hopeful. After 35 long years under the iron grip of Japanese rule, they finally had a chance at freedom. But that hope was crushed almost as quickly as it appeared. The peninsula was divided into North Korea and South Korea. The Soviet Union occupied the north, installing a communist regime, while the United States oversaw the south, supporting a capitalist government. What was meant to be a short-term arrangement quickly hardened into two opposing states with rival ideologies, armies, and leaders, setting the stage for war. The dividing line, drawn along the 38th parallel, was supposed to be temporary. It was chosen hastily by U.S. officials at the end of World War II as a convenient marker to separate Soviet troops in the north from American troops in the south. Neither side consulted the Korean people, and the line cut straight across farms, villages, and families. What was meant as a quick military arrangement soon hardened into a permanent and bitter divide. The dividing line did not just split land, it split lives. Brothers were left on opposite sides. Mothers were separated from children. Families were torn in half by a border that didn't belong to them. Then, in 1950, came the war. North Korean troops stormed across the 38th parallel, and within days, cities were burning. The United States and other UN nations rushed in to support the South. China backed the North. What followed was not a war of soldiers alone. It was a war of civilians, of scorched earth, and unrelenting bloodshed. Entire towns were wiped off the map. Bombs fell day and night. The sound of screaming never stopped. Roads were clogged with desperate refugees carrying what little they could on their backs. Many didn't make it. They starved. They froze. They were gunned down in the crossfire. Massacres were common. Innocent men were dragged from their homes and executed in front of their families. Women were assaulted. Children died clinging to the lifeless bodies of their parents. Napalm turned villages into flaming graves. Bodies were left unburied in open fields, frozen in place by the harsh Korean winter. People who survived the horror spoke in whispers. Some never spoke again. By the time the war ended in 1953, nearly 3 million people were dead. And yet, even after all that suffering, there was no peace, only a ceasefire. The fighting stopped, but the war never truly ended. The border was redrawn along the same 38th parallel, this time fortified by barbed wire, landmines, and heavily armed soldiers. What was once a nation became a frozen conflict zone, watched over by snipers and tanks. The division became permanent. The pain did too. In the north, Kim Il-sung emerged from the war as a ruthless and unchallenged leader. He built his regime on fear, loyalty, and the promise of eternal resistance against foreign enemies. His new state would be founded on Chusha, a belief in total self-reliance. But behind that slogan was something darker. A paranoia that drove the country into isolation. The government demanded total obedience. Dissent was crushed. The people were taught to love their leader more than their own family. Meanwhile, in the South, democracy eventually took root, but not without its own struggles. Military dictators came and went before freedom began to grow. The country opened to the world. It built, it traded, it moved forward. But the war never really left. Every family had a story. Every village had a graveyard. Every year, the North threatened again. While South Korea turned outward and focused on the future, North Korea turned inward and built its identity around myths. One myth mattered more than all the rest: the mountains. For North Korea, mountains were not just geography. They were defense, sanctuary, and propaganda rolled into one. Strategically, mountains meant protection. They provided natural barriers against invasion, hiding places for bases, and rugged terrain that foreign armies would struggle to cross. Symbolically, the mountains were elevated as sacred. They represented purity, strength, and unbroken spirit. The most important of all was Mount Paktu. According to official state history, Kim Il-sung fought the Japanese invaders from its forests. His son, Kim Jong-il, was said to have been born there, under a glowing star, as birds sang in celebration and a double rainbow appeared in the sky. None of it was true. Soviet records show Kim Jong-il was born in a Soviet camp in what is now Russia. But in North Korea, the truth is whatever the regime says it is. Children grew up singing about the mountain. Soldiers swore oaths beneath paintings of it. To worship Mount Paektu was to worship the bloodline of the Kims. To doubt the myth was to risk your life. The mountain was more than myth. It was a strategic shield and a rallying symbol. And as North Korea exalted it in songs and stories, one in particular was quietly chosen for a far darker purpose. Beneath its slopes, the regime would build tunnels, chambers, and hidden facilities. What the outside world saw as a sacred peak was in reality becoming the stage for North Korea's most destructive secret. The Shadow Underground, building a bomb in isolation. While children were taught to sing about Mount Paektu as the birthplace of heroes, engineers and soldiers were carving secret tunnels deep into other peaks. These were laboratories of destruction. Inside, North Korea planned to do what no one believed possible for such an isolated nation: build a nuclear bomb in silence. The road to becoming a nuclear power is long, dangerous, and often played out under the harsh spotlight of the world's attention. For most countries, the process has been visible, monitored, and widely debated. The United States, Russia, and China all developed their nuclear arsenals in full view of international scrutiny. There were tests in deserts, treaties at negotiating tables, and countless satellite images studied by analysts across the globe. But North Korea took a very different route. It chose secrecy, silence, and defiance. While the rest of the world watched each other closely, North Korea quietly set to work behind closed borders, carving a path to nuclear power that few truly understood until it was too late to stop. In the 1980s, an unexpected door opened. North Korea managed to strike a hidden deal with Pakistan's AQ Khan network, one of the most notorious black market proliferators of nuclear technology. The arrangement was shocking for its simplicity and its danger. North Korea would supply Pakistan with ballistic missiles, technology that Khan desperately wanted. In exchange, Khan's network provided the secrets of uranium enrichment like centrifuge designs, technical drawings, and critical know-how that could turn raw uranium into weapons-grade material. These were not vague scientific ideas. They were the exact blueprints that had helped Pakistan build its first nuclear weapons. Suddenly, North Korea was no longer an isolated state tinkering in the dark. It had the instructions it needed to cross the line into nuclear weapons development. Armed with this knowledge, North Korea stepped across a threshold it had only dreamed of before. Years of secret enrichment work followed, carried out behind closed borders and hidden deep underground. Laboratories and facilities took shape in silence, shielded from outside eyes. This quiet progress set the stage for the bold political move that came next. By 1993, the regime in Pyongyang, North Korea's capital and the center of its political power, made its intentions clear to the world. It announced its withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the international agreement designed to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. The announcement sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels. World leaders were stunned. What was North Korea planning, and why now? Although it briefly returned to the table in 1994 during the so-called Agreed Framework talks, the pause was short-lived. The suspicions were deep, and in 2013, North Korea pulled out entirely. It became the only nation on Earth to walk away from the treaty that was meant to prevent exactly what it was trying to achieve. From that point forward, the game changed. Underground testing began. The first detonation took place on October 9, 2006. It was small, estimated at just 0.7 kilotons, but even that blast sent tremors through the mountains. Intelligence agencies quickly understood that size did not matter. North Korea had demonstrated the ability to build and detonate a nuclear device. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. In 2009, a second test was carried out. This time the blast was stronger, more controlled, and clearly an improvement over the first. In 2013, they tested again, proving that progress was steady and relentless. By 2016, they no longer tested just once. They detonated twice in the same year. The second test came with a public claim that shocked the world. North Korea announced it had successfully created a warhead small enough to be mounted on a missile. For intelligence officials, this was the nightmare scenario. It meant North Korea was not only producing bombs underground, but preparing to launch them across borders. International reactions were immediate, but powerless. Governments condemned the tests. Sanctions were tightened again and again. Warnings were issued in speeches and emergency meetings. yet nothing stopped the detonations. The tests continued, each one larger and more precise. Seismographs around the world recorded the tremors. Civilians in the region felt the ground shake beneath them. Each blast was a reminder that North Korea was not slowing down. It was accelerating. And so we come to September 3rd, 2017, and to the mountain that was never supposed to move. The bomb that moved a mountain. Mount Mantap rises over the jagged terrain of North Korea's North Hamgyong province like a silent giant. At 2,200 meters, or about 7,200 feet, it towers above the remote and heavily guarded Punggye-ri nuclear test site. For decades, it had been just another mountain on maps, unknown outside the region. But beneath its slopes, tunnels had been carved, chambers blasted open, and the mountain itself hollowed out to contain North Korea's most dangerous secret. From 2006 to 2017, Mount Mantap became the heart of Pyongyang's nuclear program. Each underground test drilled deeper. Each detonation ripped through new galleries beneath the surface. Analysts tracking the site identified separate entry points known as the East Portal, the North Portal, and the South Portal, with reports of a possible West Portal as well. By 2017, the mountain was no longer untouched rock. It had become a vast underground testing ground engineered for destruction. Every test had been stronger than the last, but this one would be different. At the exact hour North Korea announced it had tested a hydrogen bomb, seismic monitors across the world registered the unmistakable signal of catastrophe. The U.S. Geological Survey reported a magnitude 6.1 earthquake centered at Punggye-ri. That figure alone was terrifying. A tremor of that size is normally associated with natural quakes capable of toppling buildings, tearing roads apart, and leaving entire regions crippled. Except this one was not natural. It came from a man-made weapon. Then came the second shock. 8 minutes later, another tremor shook the ground. This one measured at magnitude 4.6. At first there was confusion. Had North Korea set off another device? Was it a second bomb? But experts quickly ruled that out. The signature was different. This was not an explosion. It was something even more alarming. The mountain itself had collapsed. Scientists around the globe raced to analyze the seismic data. The conclusion was unanimous. The 2017 test had been so powerful that it fractured the geology of Mount Mantap, collapsing parts of its interior. The scale of the blast was staggering. Estimates place the yield at roughly 250 kilotons. That is 17 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. A weapon of this magnitude has the destructive capacity to level an entire city, killing hundreds of thousands in seconds, and North Korea had just proven it could build one. For intelligence agencies, the implications were chilling. Earlier tests had been warnings. This test was proof of capability. North Korea was not experimenting anymore. They were declaring themselves a nuclear power. And if their claims that the device was a hydrogen bomb were correct, then they had mastered the most advanced type of nuclear weapon known. Unlike simpler fission bombs, a hydrogen bomb is a two-stage device that uses fusion to unleash devastation many times greater. Only a handful of nations had ever built one. But what truly terrified scientists was not only the size of the bomb, but the way the mountain itself had responded. Nuclear tests are supposed to remain contained underground. This one had torn through the rock with such force that the mountain gave way. The collapse created fears of radioactive leaks, destabilized the test site, and proved that North Korea's arsenal had reached a point where even the land itself could no longer hold it. The bomb had not only shaken the world politically, it had physically moved a mountain, and the physics of what happened inside Mount Mantap would reveal effects unlike anything ever documented in a nuclear test before. The physics of the collapse. When the dust settled from the 2017 blast, the world's attention turned not only to North Korea's political message, but to the physical aftermath. For the first time in history, scientists reconstructed in detail what had happened beneath a mountain during a nuclear test. What they discovered was unlike anything seen before, and it exposed North Korea's most destructive secret in a way the regime never expected. The breakthrough came from space. Using synthetic aperture radar, a technology that can detect tiny changes in the Earth's surface by bouncing radar signals off it, researchers compared images of Mount Mantap before and after the explosion. German scientists working with the TerraSAR-X satellite and Japanese teams using the AY-LOS-2 satellite assembled an unprecedented data set. The images were processed into interferograms. These are visual maps that showed how much the ground had shifted. What they revealed stunned experts. The mountain had not just cracked, it had moved in every direction at once. The numbers were staggering. The outer slopes of Mount Mantap bulged outward by as much as 3.5 meters, or nearly 12 feet. The peak itself sank by about half a meter. In other words, the entire mountain expanded, rose, and then collapsed inward in one violent sequence. To scientists, it looked as though the mountain had inflated like a balloon under pressure and then deflated catastrophically, leaving behind permanent scars. The location of the blast was reconstructed at about 500 meters beneath the summit. That depth was crucial. It meant the explosion was not shallow enough to vent immediately into the atmosphere, but not deep enough to remain fully contained. The seismic force pulverized rock at the core of the mountain, creating a vast cavern of vaporized material. The pressure pushed outward through the layers of granite until gravity forced the weakened roof to collapse. The secondary tremor detected minutes later was the sound of a mountain caving in on itself. Geologists coined a term for what they were witnessing: tired mountain syndrome. It described a geological structure pushed beyond its limit. Mount Mantap was no longer a solid shield of stone. It had become brittle, porous, and unstable. The SAR data proved that cracks had propagated through the massif, making it impossible for the mountain to reliably contain another nuclear blast. If North Korea attempted another test in the same spot, there was a real risk that the entire structure would fail and it would release radioactive material into the air and soil. The human cost of this instability quickly surfaced in reports. According to Report Untold, at the test site collapsed after the blast, burying around 100 workers alive. Days later, a second collapse reportedly killed another 100 people. While these numbers could not be independently verified due to North Korea's secrecy, the possibility alone horrified intelligence analysts. If true, it meant that more than 200 lives had been erased in silence, with no graves, no acknowledgement, and no trace beyond whispers leaking through China's border. Satellite monitoring in the months after the test revealed continued deformation of the surface, suggesting the mountain was still shifting and settling long after the explosion. The ground was sagging, cracking, and sinking. For the international community, the physics told a story more frightening than propaganda ever could. The test had unleashed energy equal to 250,000 tons of TNT, enough to erase a modern metropolis, and it had potentially poisoned the land around it for generations. Ghost streams and silent towns, human and ecological fallout. What unfolded beneath Mount Mantap in 2017 wasn't solely a geological event, it was a biological catastrophe, one that has left invisible scars across the landscape and lives of an entire region. According to defector testimonies, the aftermath of the detonation stretched far beyond seismic instability. In the weeks and months following the blast, local hospitals, already under-resourced and heavily surveilled, began to report an increase in births marred by severe deformities. In more than one instance, parents were allegedly coerced into terminating their newborns, and in the most harrowing accounts, infants were killed outright under duress. Medical professionals, themselves operating under military scrutiny, were reportedly silenced or reassigned. But the biological toll did not stop at childbirth. According to defector reports and outside investigations, a noticeable uptick in leukemia, thyroid cancers, and unexplained skin lesions began to surface among civilians living within a 30-kilometer radius of the test site. Local agriculture, once the lifeline of rural North Hamgyong province, withered. Underground wells ran dry, likely displaced or contaminated by subterranean shockwaves and possible radioactive leakage. Because no independent inspections were allowed, these findings remain unconfirmed but widely feared. For communities already surviving at the edge of famine, this wasn't just ecological, it was existential. The government's response was not remediation, but repression. Defectors cited in multiple reports revealed that citizens found transporting soil or water samples aboard trains were promptly arrested, interrogated, and often dispatched to labor camps. No independent inspectors were allowed access to the zone. No environmental assessments were conducted. Only the elite inner circle of the military apparatus were afforded any form of shelter. Quietly, days before the test, they were moved to underground bunkers, shielded from what Pyongyang's leadership knew was coming. Ordinary civilians, meanwhile, were left exposed. No warning, no protection, and no post-test care. Shadowing Mount Mantap is the infamous Hwasong concentration camp, Kwanli-so No. 16, one of the largest and most secretive political prison facilities in North Korea. Believed to hold upwards of 20,000 inmates, including children and elderly relatives of those merely suspected of dissent, this sprawling complex has long been associated with forced labor. While initially established for mining and agricultural work, analysts believe Hwasong's role shifted in the late 1980s, aligning temporally and logistically with the construction of the extensive tunnel networks beneath the mountain. This connection has been suggested by analysts, but has never been independently proven. Satellite imagery from that era reveals a surge in infrastructure and excavation activity, all consistent with early nuclear testing preparations. The human cost, while impossible to fully quantify, is staggering. Defector testimonies continue to describe entire communities succumbing to mysterious illnesses. And yet, the most chilling part of this story isn't what already happened, but what may still be coming. Because even as the mountain broke, signs began to appear that North Korea was preparing to test again. What comes next? The future of a nuclear nightmare. In the wake of North Korea's dramatic 2017 hydrogen bomb test, international observers were cautiously hopeful. The scale of the test had shocked the world, but it also created a rare opening for diplomacy. Governments, analysts, and negotiators saw a chance, however slim, that Pyongyang might be ready to pull back from the brink. Then, just months later, in May 2018, the regime staged a rare and carefully orchestrated spectacle. It invited foreign journalists to witness what it described as a formal ceremony to shut down the Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Cameras captured the moment as explosions collapsed tunnels at the North Portal, the very place where 5 of the country's 6 nuclear tests had taken place. Officials in South Korea and the United States quickly welcomed the move. It looked like progress. Some even dared to believe that diplomacy was beginning to thaw decades of tension. But that moment of hope did not last long. By 2022, something began to shift. Analysts at 38 North, a respected monitoring group, released high-resolution satellite imagery that showed disturbing signs of renewed activity at the very same site. Their findings were soon backed by the BBC.
North Korea claims it has successfully tested a hydrogen bomb, a device which can be loaded onto a long-range ballistic missile.
And confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Punggye-ri facility, once thought to be abandoned and sealed, was coming back to life. Construction crews were working again. Earth had been cleared. Tunnels at the south and west portals were being re-excavated. These were not minor repairs. They looked like preparations. The sense of alarm was immediate. Security analysts and nuclear experts began sounding the alarm. Were the tunnels being expanded to accommodate a more powerful device? Was North Korea preparing for a 7th test? If so, it could be far more advanced than anything the world had seen from Pyongyang before. Some experts believed the regime was now aiming to test a miniaturized warhead, one small enough to be mounted on an intercontinental ballistic missile. Others warned that the North could be readying a new thermonuclear device. The implications were serious. This would not just be another show of force, it would be a direct signal that North Korea's nuclear program had reached a dangerous new level. Meanwhile, the world around it had changed. In the years following the earlier tests, global stability has weakened. New wars have erupted, and tensions between nuclear-armed powers are higher than they had been in decades. Against this backdrop, the idea of another North Korean nuclear test felt even more dangerous. It would not just shake the Korean peninsula. It could trigger a wave of reactions from Washington to Tokyo to Beijing. Military readiness levels would be raised, stock markets could plunge, civil populations would once again be reminded of just how close the nuclear threat really is. What makes the situation even more unsettling is North Korea's use of surprise. The regime has shown again and again that it favors dramatic gestures. The timing of its actions is often unpredictable. Its tests are not just about weapons, they are about power, leverage, and fear. Every detonation is a message. Every tunnel cleared and every satellite image showing new activity becomes part of a broader psychological strategy. In 2017, one bomb shook a mountain. It shocked the scientific community. It sent tremors through foreign capitals. It made the world realize just how far North Korea had come. Now, with signs pointing toward a possible new test, the question is no longer if, but when. North Korea may be getting ready to move another mountain, and this time, the aftershocks might be felt across the entire globe. What do you think about this captivating video? Feel free to share your comments with us in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.